Some people are born into ordinary lives. Lucien Devereux was not that lucky. Welcome back to Tongue of the Serpent. Tonight we step away from the customers, the candles, and the immediate dangers of the crew of the Morningstar to ask a more dangerous question. How did Lucien become Lucien? In a city like New Orleans, nobody gets an origin story told cleanly, not if it matters. The truth gathers rumor around itself here. It picks up lace and smoke and other people's opinions. By the time a story survives long enough to become legend, it has usually learned to wear a false name and good shoes. But some things remain. A strange child, a house that listened, a hunger for objects with stories still trapped inside them, and one impossible night at a crossroads, when something older than courtesy offered Lucien Devereux exactly the kind of future a man like him would never be wise enough to refuse. Tonight's episode is The Origin of Lucien Devereux. Come a little closer. Every city has a lie it loves. This one happens to be wearing a waistcoat. New Orleans has stories older than iron balconies, older than the moss that pretends it is a decoration and not a slow, patient hunger. Some of these stories are true. Others are truer than truth, which is to say, they carry its shape even after the details have been dressed for company. And many are lies. The city loves so much it keeps them polished and hands them to anyone hungry for meaning. Lucien Devereux has an origin story the way a river has a current. Everyone feels it, and no one agrees where it begins. Ask 3 people in the quarter, and you will get 4 versions. In one, he is a tragic heir. In another, a clever thief who stole the wrong thing and never stopped paying for it. In another, he was always a gentleman and always a monster, depending on whether you met him before or after midnight. The details change. The rule does not. Lucien Devereux was always going to be found. He was born under a blue moon, allegedly, that was not supposed to be there. I say allegedly because people in New Orleans will swear to anything if it improves the story. But the old families, the one with names like locked doors, will tell you the moon on that night looked wrong. Too pale, too bright, too interested. He was born in the Maison des Murmures, the House of Whispers, a Creole mansion with a reputation the way some families have bloodlines. Depending on who you ask, it once belonged to sugar barons, alchemists, cursed merchants, or a man who tried to cheat the devil and discovered the devil takes cheating personally. The house listened. It listened like an ear listens. Floorboards remembered footsteps. Walls kept confessions. Doors creaked in rhythms suspiciously close to names people had tried not to say. Lucien came into the world and never cried. That part appears in every version, which is why it makes people uncomfortable. Babies cry. It is how they announce they are alive and unhappy about it. Lucien, they say, simply opened his eyes and looked calm, alert, as though he had arrived for an appointment. He was a neat child, too, in the way some children seem to have been born faintly elderly by mistake. Hair always combed, collar always straight, boots polished. Clothes too tidy for a boy who ought to have been climbing fences and skinning his knees. He carried himself with such small gravity that adults lowered their voices around him without knowing why, and the house listened most of all. It whispered his name the way a mouth practices a new word. Lucien, 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 as if rehearsing for the day it would need to call him back. They called him Le Garçon qui trouve, the boy who finds things. Plenty of children can find trouble with their eyes closed, but that was not Lucien's talent. No, Lucien found things the way a magnet finds nails, the way a tongue finds a sore tooth. Objects with stories in them leaned toward him. They preferred his hands. He moved through markets, alleyways, and half-lit stalls with his collar straight and his gaze steady, as though he were taking attendance. Adults watched him with a faint unease. Children avoided him, not because he was cruel, but because he was calm in a way that made them feel messy. He found a mirror before he found many friends. It sat in a stall crowded with tarnished silver and rosaries kissed too often. The woman selling it had tired eyes and an accent thick as chicory coffee. She named a price that would have made a banker reconsider his morals. Lucien examined the mirror without touching it, which was his first sign of sense. Its frame was all curling vines and tiny carved faces, each one wearing mild disappointment. The glass itself looked old, but not cloudy, impatient. Lucien reached into his pocket and produced a wooden nickel. The woman laughed. The laugh was meant to be dismissive. It came out, nervous. "That won't buy you a breath," she said. "It might," Lucien replied politely. "Buy me this." He set the coin on the counter. The woman stared at him, then at the mirror, then back again, with the resigned air of someone who has decided not to argue with a strange child on a strange day. She took the nickel. Lucien brought the mirror home and sat it on his dresser. The reflection was not exactly his. It had his face, certainly, but not his expression. When Lucien smiled, the reflection raised one eyebrow. When Lucien attempted innocence, the reflection rolled its eyes with priestly contempt. Lucien tested it with a small lie, the sort of harmless thing people say to make the world run smoother. The reflection sighed, loudly, judgmentally. Lucien, who should have been offended, lit up with delight. "Oh," he said, "you're judgy." The mirror looked unimpressed. Lucien looked charmed. At 13, he found a pocket watch in a gutter. It was raining, the ordinary kind of rain, and the street ran with brown water and broken pieces of other people's days. Lucien spotted the watch the way a cat spots a moving thread. He fished it out with a handkerchief because even then he had standards. It was silver, engraved with tiny stars scratched in by a careful hand. The face was clean. The numbers were crisp. The second hand moved backward. Lucien held it to his ear. It ticked with the calm insistence of something that had never once asked permission to be wrong. When he slipped it into his pocket, the world did something subtle. Time did not reverse. It loosened. People hesitated mid-step. Conversation stuttered and corrected themselves. A dog barked at an empty corner and then seemed embarrassed by its own certainty. Carrying the watch made certainty less certain. A wrong turn became 3 possible streets. A decision developed branches. Most boys would have thrown it into the river. Lucien adjusted his cuffs and said, "Interesting." The watch seemed to approve. Later there was a locket. It waited in a velvet box at the back of a dusty shop that smelled of old perfume and older lies. The shopkeeper called it harmless, which was how Lucien knew at once that it was not. The locket was oval, gold and warm, when he touched it, as if it had been living in someone else's hand only moments earlier. He did not open it right away. He carried it home, set it on the table, waited to see if it moved. It did not, so he opened it. Inside, there was no portrait, only a whisper, a brush of someone else's secrets against his mind. Names he did not know. Memories he had not earned. A melody that made his chest ache with grief that belonged to someone else. Lucien closed it quickly, heart striking once hard. Then he smiled. "So," he said softly, "you're one of those." That was the lesson the quarter taught him early and often. Objects have opinions. And Lucien, near and composed and endlessly curious, learned to smile politely at danger and call it interesting. By 20, he was a fixture in the quarter, the way certain statues are fixtures, always present, always watched, always a little more alive than they ought to be. People noticed him. They always had. But now they noticed him with hunger in it. The admiration of those who wanted to be him. The suspicion of those who wanted to unmake him, and the quiet attention of things that did not, strictly speaking, count as people. He dressed impeccably, hair smoothed into order, beard shaped with mathematical care, waistcoat fitted, gloves neat. He carried a cane, not because he needed it, but because a cane is a kind of punctuation. It turns a man into a sentence people feel compelled to read. Someone once asked him why he took such trouble. Lucien smiled. "Style is power," he said. Then, because he was young and elegant and very nearly honest, he added, "And power is everything." People laughed. They also listened. He began lingering at thresholds, crossings and doorways, the places where the air changes and the world seems to hesitate before choosing a direction. He stood there as if waiting for something. And in New Orleans, when a man begins courting fate, fate usually flirts back. It happened on a summer evening, the kind New Orleans does best. Thick air, slick heat, the city sweating secrets through its brickwork. Music drifted lazily from somewhere nearby. The street smelled of river damp, spilled beer, and magnolia gone a little too sweet. Lucien walked as though the night had been arranged for his convenience. He wore black, crisp and immaculate, the cane in his hand tapping a measured rhythm against the pavement. Nothing about him suggested uncertainty, which was perhaps why he was so precisely found. At Rue de la Levée stood an intersection, and beside it, impossibly, a street sign he had never seen before. The letters were crisp, too fresh, as if painted moments ago by an unseen hand with beautiful penmanship and no respect for maps. Something that wasn't there yesterday afternoon. Lucien stopped. He was not frightened, but the human mind insists on staring at nonsense in the hope that nonsense will eventually apologize and explain itself. The moment took on the unmistakable weight of company. A man stepped out of the shadows with the easy confidence of someone who believed shadows belonged to him. He was tall, blond, and dressed in a white suit so flawless it looked tailored by dangerous perfectionists. He moved like a dancer. He smiled like a darling. The smile was profoundly wrong. It was the sort of smile that makes your instincts check the locks on your doors and then remember, too, that locks are mostly manners. "Lucien," the man said, and Lucien's name sounded, tasted, and approved of. "Lucien Devereux." Lucien lifted one brow. "We've met?" The lawn man laughed, delighted. "Not properly, but I've watched you." The words sounded affectionate. That did not improve them. "You're a collector," the man said, "a dreamer, not half bad at poker." "You've been busy," Lucien said. "I like hobbies," the man replied brightly, "and you, my darling relic, are my favorite kind." There it was, the nickname, wrapped in charm and pinched just tightly enough to sting. "Relic," Lucien replied. "That seems premature. I'm 20. "Oh, it's accurate," the man said cheerfully, "and accuracy is a form of affection." Then, with the casual intimacy of someone who assumed he was allowed, he straightened Lucien's cuff. Lucien did not step back. That would have been a concession. "And who," he asked mildly, "are you supposed to be?" The grin widened, beautiful, infuriating, bottomless. "I'm the offer," the man said. "I'm the door. I'm the part of the story where you decide whether you're going to stay ordinary." Lucien glanced at the invented street sign, then back at him. "I wasn't aware I was ordinary." The man clapped softly, pleased. "See? That's why I like you." He leaned closer. Lucien caught the scent of clean linen, expensive cologne, and the faintest trace of smoke that belonged to no earthly cigar or pipe. Burnt roses, perhaps, sulfur, wearing perfume. "Here's the thing," the man said, bright and confidential. "You have talent, a gift for finding what doesn't want to be found. But such talent is wasted on mortality. You'll be dead before you've even collected the interesting parts." Lucien's voice went careful. "And you're offering me forever," the man said as casually as dessert. "A legacy, a shop, a purpose, immortality, if you prefer the melodramatic word. Forever has a price." "It does," the man said almost fondly, "and you are exactly the sort of person who pays prices without whining." "I'm touched," Lucien murmured. "Oh, you will be," the man said, delighted. Then with sudden sharpness beneath the sweetness, "But don't worry, I'll be gentle." Lucien did not blink. "Explain." The man circled him slowly, like a cat that had already decided the chair belonged to it. "Every item you touch," he said, "bears a story, a fragment, a sliver of someone's soul caught in grain, silver, fabric, glass. People leave themselves behind in their objects, the way they leave fingerprints on crystal." He smiled wider. "You will become the keeper. You will hold their fragments. You will see the truth behind the mask, the debt beneath the gift, the hunger beneath the prayer." Lucien listened, face composed, pulse less so. This was dangerous, obscene perhaps, also unavoidably interesting. The man saw the wanting arrive and brightened at once. "You like the idea." Lucien exhaled slowly. "It does sound interesting." "Good," the man said. "Then we're friends." "Friends don't usually ambush one another at Crossroads." "They do," the man said, "when they know what you'll become if they don't." Then he offered his hand. It was a beautiful hand, clean nails, perfect cuff, palm up like an invitation to dance, or a contract, pretending to be courtesy. Lucien hesitated just long enough for the world to notice. Then he accepted. The air changed the instant skin met skin. The heat snapped tighter. The sounds of the quarter blurred at the edges. Somewhere nearby, a street lamp flickered once, as if acknowledging a signature. And the world, as worlds do, signed with them. Lucien woke with the strange feeling of having slept through a storm he had not heard. The morning light was wrong, too pale, too still. The air tasted clean in a way New Orleans air rarely does, as though the city had washed its hands overnight. He sat up, smoothed his hair without thinking, and realized the room was his only in the way a coffin is yours once the lid closes. The Maison des Murmures was gone. In its place stood a shop, solid and respectable, as if it had been there for a century, and everyone else had simply been too polite to mention it. Above the door, carved into the wood in letters that looked as though they had always belonged there, was the name, Krewe of the Morningstar. Lucien walked through it slowly, as if expecting the walls to apologize and rearrange themselves back into his childhood. They did not. Shelves lined the room, crowded with objects he had never seen and somehow recognized at once. A locket that whispered when no one held it. A porcelain doll whose eyes seemed to shift if he looked away. A cane leaning against the wall with the posture of something that demanded reverence. A bell above the door did not ring, but felt very much as though it wanted to. And on the inside of the door hung a sign, perfectly placed, where any customer might read it and mistake it for a joke. No refunds, no exchanges. You take what takes you. Lucien stared at it for a long moment. Then he smiled, wide and delighted, the smile of a man unexpectedly invited to dinner and deciding at once he will attend. Well, he said, mild as weather, this is unexpected, and that, more than the crossroads or the handshake, is why Lucien survived. He treated catastrophe like a social engagement. Lucien learned quickly that immortality was not a gift. It was employment. The shop came without an instruction manual. It came with shelves, weight, and objects that behaved like sleeping animals, quiet until touched, suddenly opinionated afterward. At first, he did what he had always done. He observed. He handled things carefully. He smiled at danger, the way one smiles at an overly dramatic dinner guest, and waited to see whether the city would notice there was a new door worth trying. The city noticed immediately. People wandered in like moths with better shoes. They came for remedies, relics, luck that would not squeak when it walked, forgiveness small enough to fit in a pocket. They came pretending they were merely curious, as though curiosity has ever been an honest word in New Orleans. Lucien discovered the rule the man in white had promised. Every item carried a story. Not amusing anecdotes, fragments, a little soul caught in the crack of porcelain, the tarnish on silver, the grain of wood. The Krewe did not sell curiosities. It brokered consequences. It exchanged fates the way ordinary shops exchanged coin. Customers left with more than they had intended to purchase. Some returned weeks later to thank him. Their eyes were the same eyes, but something behind them had shifted position. They looked lighter, or older, or suddenly calm, as if they had set down a burden they had been dragging so long they no longer remembered picking it up. Others never returned at all. Lucien learned to mark these absences quietly, the way one marks weather or seasons or debts coming due. There were rules, the kind no one writes down because, once written, they sound impolite. Do not promise what the shop has not offered. Do not touch an object you cannot afford to understand. And never mistake politeness for safety. One afternoon, a thief tried to rob him. He came in with a knife and a demand for valuables, as if this were the sort of place that kept its dangers in cash drawers. Lucien sighed with the patient disappointment of a schoolmaster whose students insisted on learning the hard way. He handed the man a clock. Simple thing, respectable, the kind of clock that might sit on a mantel in a house full of ordinary lies. The thief snatched it and fled. Days later, they found him in an alley, aged 90 years, muttering about lost hours as if time were a wallet he had misplaced. Lucien, when asked about it, only smiled and returned it to his shelves. His humor remained peculiar. "Careful with that mirror," he would tell customers. "It's a bit judgy." Or, with a fond pat to an innocent-looking teapot, "That one doesn't make tea, it makes amends." He said such things lightly, but the cost lived in the margin. Every story he sold, every fate he exchanged, every hour the shop borrowed from someone else, braided another thread into the work he had accepted with a handshake and a smile. Jobs, as a rule, always collect. Late at night, when the quarter's laughter thinned and the humidity softened into something almost gentle, Lucien sat alone behind the counter with his ledger open. He wrote in neat, careful strokes, as though good penmanship might prevent the world from bleeding through the page. Names, objects, notes that look like inventory until read closely enough to reveal themselves as prayers written in the language of receipts. He hummed as he worked, a haunted tune older than the shop, or perhaps older than he was willing to admit. Somewhere deep in the Krewe, an unseen clock ticked backwards, steadily, as if time in that place were not a road, but a spiral staircase with excellent manners. Lucien paused once and looked up at the rows of objects watching him back. For the briefest moment, something like contemplation crossed his face and was smoothed away at once, as though even his thoughts ought to remain properly groomed. Then the front door gave its soft, patient sigh. A new customer, a new story, another threshold crossed politely, because in New Orleans, stories do not end. They linger until another doorway lets them in. You've been listening to Tongue of the Serpent. Tonight you heard how Lucien Devereux came to the crew of the Morningstar, or at least one version of how it happened. In New Orleans, that is often the closest thing to truth anyone gets. A listening house, a boy who found what other people missed, a crossroads that appeared where no map had put it, and one elegant, impossible offer that turned immortality into a job and curiosity into vocation. Now you know a little more about the man behind the counter, why he notices what others miss, why he treats danger with manners, why the shop feels less like a business than a promise that has already begun collecting. Thank you for listening. Until next time, remember, some doors are found, others find you first.